Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are unpacking what is literally, and I mean literally, the single most famous piece of music in the entire world. It's a song you've probably heard 1,000 times, right? A melody just permanently etched into your brain from the time you were in a crib. I am, of course, talking about Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But, we aren't just going to sing along today. We're looking at a super cute, kawaii-style, toddler-friendly take on this classic, and we're going to completely deconstruct it, because beneath this bright, simple exterior lies an incredibly rich history, some absolutely fascinating astrophysics, and profound insights into how the human brain actually develops. I promise you, by the time we wrap up this explainer, there's no way you'll look at this simple little lullaby the same way again. So let me start things off by asking you a quick question. Can you recite the second verse of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? Really, think about it for a second. We all know those famous first 4 lines, right? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. But then what? For a piece of culture that is just so unbelievably ubiquitous, it's actually amazing how a massive knowledge gap exists right after that first stanza. It's often chalked up to that incredibly prolific author named Anonymous. Now, as the poet Virginia Woolf famously observed, for most of history, Anonymous was a woman. And you know what? In the case of this iconic rhyme, she hit the nail on the head. Because the words weren't actually written by Anonymous. They were penned by a 23-year-old English poet named Jane Taylor and published all the way back in 1806 in a collection called Rhymes for the Nursery. And get this, it actually spans 5 entire verses. Now, in the educational version we're looking at today, they pair each line with its Hindi meaning to help kids learn. Look closely at the text of the second verse. It says, "Then the traveler in the dark, or Pir anhere mein yatri, thanks you for your tiny spark," which means Tumhari choti si chingari ke liye dhanyavad deta hai. He could not see where to go, or Wa nahi dekh pata ki kahan jana hai. If you did not twinkle so, agar tumesi nahi chamakte. This introduces our core motif for today, that tiny spark. It literally describes a traveler in the dark relying on this fluctuating light to navigate. So Jane Taylor provided the brilliant words, but here's the kicker. She didn't write the music.
Which brings us to Section 1, Origins of the Melody, and a famous French connection. Yeah, the 19th century English lyrics, that's really only half the story. The origins of the actual melody take us completely out of England, across the English Channel, to a totally different, much older European context. This tune actually predates Jane Taylor's poem by decades. It started out around 1740 as an anonymous French pastoral song. By 1761, the melody, known as Ah, vous dirai-je maman, was officially published. And here is a super fun fact. By 1774, it was paired with lyrics in a poem called La Confidence Naïve, which, believe it or not, was actually a parody of a love song where a girl confesses to her mother that a boy tricked her into falling into his arms. So yeah, hardly a nursery rhyme. Then, right around 1781 or 1782, a young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who was about 25 at the time, gets his hands on it and composes 12 variations on the melody for solo piano. It literally wasn't until 1806 that Jane Taylor's starry lyrics finally collided with this old French tune. And honestly, this perfectly illustrates the ultimate musical recycling, because it wasn't just Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star that latched onto this 18th century French melody. The exact same sequence of 6 notes, C, C, G, G, A, G, forms the exact foundation for the alphabet song and Ba Ba Black Sheep. No way, right? 3 of the absolute most foundational childhood songs in the Western world all independently decided to use the exact same piece of French music. It's just a mind-blowing piece of cultural evolution. Moving right along to Section 2, the science of scintillation. Okay, so we've got the history of the music and the lyrics down. Now let's totally pivot the narrative away from history and dive straight into astrophysics. Because when Jane Taylor wrote about that tiny spark that twinkles in the sky, what specific scientific phenomenon was she actually describing? Well, the formal scientific term for twinkling is atmospheric scintillation. You see, twinkling is actually just an optical illusion. The stars themselves, they aren't flickering or burning unevenly at all. If you were, say, floating up in the International Space Station, the stars would just look like steady, unblinking points of light. The twinkle is caused entirely by our own Earth's atmosphere, acting as a completely chaotic, turbulent medium. So to really get this, we need to understand the epic journey of that starlight. Step 1. A straight, unchanging beam of light travels across vast, incredibly empty distances in space for literally millions of years. Then, step 2. In the absolute final microsecond of its journey, that beam hits Earth's atmosphere. Step 3. The atmosphere is a mess. It's chaotic, wind, temperature gradients, differences in air density, they all combine to create these turbulent layers. And these layers basically act like shifting lenses. Finally, step 4. As the starlight passes through these shifting lenses, it refracts. It bends slightly in all different directions. So by the time it actually hits your eye, it appears to be dancing, shifting color, and flickering. And the whole shebang is exactly what we call atmospheric scintillation. Now, you might be wondering, okay, if the atmosphere causes twinkling, why don't planets twinkle? It really just comes down to distance. Stars are so unfathomably far away that they appear to our eyes as tiny single-point sources. It's just a single, narrow beam of light, so any atmospheric distortion bends that entire beam, causing a super noticeable flicker. Planets, on the other hand, are much, much closer to Earth, so they appear not as single points but as tiny visible disks. A disk sends multiple light rays through the atmosphere all at once. So while some rays get bent one way, others get bent another way, and they basically just average each other out. And that is exactly why planets shine steadily while distant stars twinkle like crazy. All right, bringing it back down to Earth for section 3, the power of rhymes and sparking brain development. We've talked a lot about the physical spark of starlight, but now let's explore the neurological spark of early childhood development. Like, why do we obsessively sing this song to babies? What is the actual cognitive impact of pairing a kawaii aesthetic, bright colors, and simple melodies? Well, nursery rhymes aren't just cute entertainment. They are literally serious brain food. Listening comprehension actually precedes reading comprehension. When a child hears the rhyming of Twinkle, Twinkle, especially with translations reinforcing meaning, they are developing absolutely crucial phonemic awareness. They're learning how to put the sounds of vowels and consonants together to make actual words. Because rhymes follow predictable patterns, they help children learn memory and recall. They teach story sequencing, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they introduce brand new vocabulary plus the rhythm of language, including pitch and voice inflection. And the benefits go way beyond just cognitive skills. Physically speaking, reciting these rhymes actually helps children develop their mouth and tongue muscles by practicing all those different sounds. And socially and emotionally, sharing a nursery rhyme provides this incredibly safe, secure bond between parents and children. These rhymes become almost like little places that young kids can retreat to when they feel lonely or overwhelmed. It provides deep emotional comfort and a real sense of shared history. But, this brings us to a rather alarming piece of data, 2,500. To put that into perspective, according to literacy experts back in 1945, the average elementary school student had a vocabulary of about 10,000 words. Today, that number has plummeted to just 2,500 words. That is a massive drop, and researchers point directly to the fact that parents are simply not reading and reciting traditional rhymes to their children as much as they used to. Kids are increasingly relying on screens to just paint pictures for them, rather than forming those images in their own minds through the oral traditional verses like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Which leads us to our final thought for today. In an increasingly digital, fast-paced age, are we failing to ignite that essential spark of language, comfort, and imagination in the next generation? Jane Taylor's 1806 poem talked about the star's tiny spark guiding the traveler in the dark. Perhaps the song itself is a tiny spark, one that guides the developing minds of our children. So the next time you hear that famous French melody, whether it's in English or Hindi, remember the rich astrophysics and the crucial brain science behind it all. Keep singing, keep questioning, and keep learning. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.